Hello there, my name is Thomas, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds, where curiosity takes its shoes off and science pulls up a blanket. Tonight, we're stepping quietly into one of the strangest questions we've ever asked on this channel. A question that sits somewhere between philosophy and physics, between cosmic wonder and quiet unease. What if Earth is a zoo, not for us to visit, but for us to live in? What if, for all our searching and sending of signals, we are the ones being watched, observed, studied, maybe even protected, without ever knowing it? It's an idea that began as speculation, whispered between scientists and science fiction writers alike. But beneath its strangeness lies something hauntingly logical. The universe is vast, uncountable stars, unthinkable distances, and by all statistical reason, life should be everywhere. Civilizations should have risen, expanded, reached out across the stars, and yet the skies remain silent. No messages, no visitors, no signs that anyone else is out there, unless, of course, they're choosing not to be seen. What if the reason we've heard nothing isn't because the universe is empty, but because we are part of an experiment that isn't supposed to know it's being watched? Like animals in a beautifully crafted habitat, given everything we need, left to evolve, unaware of the glass walls around us. Could that explain the silence, the missing signals, the strange coincidences that thread through our own story of existence? Before we drift deeper into that possibility, I'd love to invite you to slow down for a moment. If you enjoy traveling with me through these forgotten realms of science and imagination, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It helps more wanderers find their way here. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? I always love to see how far these quiet questions travel. Now take a breath. Feel the weight of the world beneath you, the warmth of the air, the pulse of life that hums through every corner of this planet. To imagine that all of this might be part of something larger, something observed, is both thrilling and a little unsettling. Could it be that the reason we haven't found intelligent life is because they've already found us? Perhaps the stars we gaze at aren't silent after all. Perhaps they're watching, waiting, careful not to disturb the subjects of their grand experiment. Maybe that's what makes this theory so hypnotic. It's not about invasion or conspiracy. It's about perspective, about the idea that we are living inside a kind of cosmic nature reserve, where intelligence is allowed to bloom under quiet supervision. You might picture them, whoever they are, looking down from a safe and visible distance. Maybe they don't interfere because that would change the data. Maybe they're watching to see what we'll become, or maybe in some ways we're their reflection, their memory, life they once were, played out again on a younger world. What might it have felt like to realize this for the first time? To wonder if the skies above aren't just empty space, but a ceiling made of glass? Tonight, we'll explore that idea in full. The zoo hypothesis, the strange, delicate theory that maybe, just maybe, we are not alone but contained. We'll trace it back to where it began, with a question posed by physicist Enrico Fermi in 1950. Where is everybody? And before we can answer that, we have to understand why that question still echoes through every star we've ever seen, and why silence itself might be the biggest clue of all. Picture the night sky above you, vast, ancient, endlessly deep. Stars hang like suspended embers in the dark, each one a potential sun to unseen worlds. When you look at them long enough, the silence feels heavy, almost deliberate. Somewhere up there, you think, there must be others. There should be others. That was the heart of a simple question asked one summer afternoon in 1950, over lunch at Los Alamos. The physicist Enrico Fermi, brilliant and practical, set down his coffee cup and asked the table, almost casually, "Where is everybody?" It was a question that would outlive him, echoing across decades of science and imagination, because the numbers don't lie. If the universe is as old and vast as we know it to be, if billions of stars are orbited by planets, and even a small fraction of those can host life, then intelligent civilizations should not just exist. They should be everywhere. And yet they are not, or at least they don't seem to be. We see no messages in the noise of space. We find no artifacts drifting through the dark. The radio sky hums with the static of stars, but not with voices. The contradiction between the high probability of life and the total absence of evidence is what we now call the Fermi paradox. What might it have felt like to be in that room, to hear that question for the first time, to feel the air still as a dozen scientists realized that the silence of the stars was not just poetic, it was suspicious. For a long time, people assumed the universe was teeming with neighbors. After all, our own galaxy is home to hundreds of billions of suns, and there are more galaxies in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on Earth. If even a fraction of those suns host planets like ours, and even a fraction of those develop life, then by simple probability, intelligent beings should have risen again and again across the cosmos. Civilizations older than ours by millions of years. Civilizations that might have spread outward, explored, colonized, built machines to bridge the stars. And yet, our skies remain empty. Maybe that's what makes this silence so haunting. It's not what we see, but what we don't. Imagine standing outside on a clear night. The air is cool. A soft breeze stirs the leaves. You look up, expecting to feel surrounded by infinity, and instead you feel alone. That feeling, multiplied by the scale of galaxies, is the Fermi paradox made emotional. The universe feels too quiet. Scientists have tried to explain this quiet in countless ways. Some say we're early, that life rarely reaches intelligence, and we might simply be the first to rise. Others argue we're late, that civilizations come and go, burning bright and brief like cosmic candles, leaving behind no trace before the next spark ignites. There's even the unsettling idea that advanced beings may have already come and gone, leaving ruins too subtle or ancient for us to recognize. But perhaps the strangest explanation is the one we're exploring tonight, that we're not alone at all, just isolated, like animals in an exhibit that's designed to look like wilderness. Maybe the silence isn't accidental. Maybe it's the soundproof glass of the cosmic zoo. Before we drift too far into speculation, let's linger for a moment on scale. The Milky Way alone stretches 100,000 light-years across. If a civilization built ships that could cross even a small fraction of that distance over millions of years, they could have explored every star in the galaxy. Statistically, someone should have. The laws of physics allow it, time allows it, curiosity certainly allows it, and yet no one has come knocking. Perhaps that's the real mystery of the Fermi paradox. It's not a question of numbers, but of behavior. It assumes that what drives us, the urge to explore, to connect, would drive them too. But what if they think differently? What if contact, to them, is something sacred or dangerous or forbidden? Maybe that's what makes this age feel so dreamlike, the calm before discovery. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine drifting through interstellar space. The stars seem to hum softly, like distant bells. Each one could hold a world with oceans, mountains, cities, dreams. But between those worlds stretches an ocean of nothingness, cold, vast and perfectly quiet. Somewhere, light years away, other beings might be looking up at their skies, wondering the same thing we are. Where is everybody? Every few decades, a new explanation rises. Some are hopeful, others grim. The Great Filter, for instance. The idea that most civilizations never make it past a certain point. Maybe they destroy themselves before they can reach the stars. Maybe intelligence is its own trap, a spark that burns too fast. If that's true, our silence could be the whisper of survivors in a universe of ghosts. But maybe the silence is purposeful. Imagine that our galaxy is like a forest at night. You don't shout in a dark forest, you listen. You move carefully, because you don't know what else might be out there, listening too. Perhaps the stars are full of civilizations who know that silence is safety, that shouting into the dark might bring attention from something they'd rather avoid. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That maybe we've mistaken absence for restraint. Still, there's another possibility, one both eerie and oddly comforting. Maybe we are being watched. Maybe the silence is maintained not by fear, but by design. Perhaps we are part of a grand observation, our progress monitored from a distance, our evolution unfolding like a documentary written in the language of biology and time. What would it mean if the stars were not indifferent but attentive? Every sunrise would still paint the same skies. Every tide would still rise and fall. But behind it all might be an unseen audience, studying, learning, waiting. If you've ever felt that strange sense of being noticed when you're alone under the stars, you've brushed against this idea. The feeling that maybe, just beyond perception, there's awareness watching from the dark. It doesn't have to be sinister. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's compassion. Maybe it's something like love, scaled to the size of galaxies. Pause for a moment. Listen to the quiet of your own breathing. The same air that fills your lungs has passed through mountains and oceans and the exhalations of every living thing that came before you. You are, in every sense, part of the system you're trying to understand. Maybe that's why the question, where is everybody, feels so personal, because what we're really asking is, are we alone in our awareness? As telescopes grew stronger and sensors more sensitive, humanity began to listen in earnest. We built massive radio dishes. Giant ears turned toward the sky, searching for any sign of artificial signal, any pattern that might reveal a civilization beyond Earth. The project became known as SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. It was as if, after centuries of wondering, we had finally decided to call out across the cosmic ocean and wait for an answer. But no answer came, only static. For years, scientists have tuned to their instruments to the hum of the galaxy, scanning frequencies, decoding bursts of energy, always hoping to find something deliberate among the chaos of starlight. Once, in 1977, a signal did appear, a narrow, strong transmission from deep space that lasted just 72 seconds. The astronomer who saw it circled it on the printout and wrote a single word in the margin, "Wow." The wow signal became a legend, a ghost in the data. No one has ever heard it again. No one knows if it was a transmission from another world or just a trick of cosmic noise. But for a brief, electric moment, it felt as though someone had whispered back. Maybe that's all we've been waiting for. Not proof, but acknowledgement. The faintest sign that someone else is awake in the dark. Somewhere between skepticism and wonder lies a softer truth. Maybe the universe is full of life, but communication, real, meaningful connection, is rare. Maybe each civilization, like a firefly, flashes briefly, separated by impossible distances and incompatible timelines. They might have risen and fallen long before we even learned to shape words. What might it have felt like to be one of them, to live, to reach for the stars, to fade, and to never know that, somewhere else, another world was about to do the same? In a way, the Fermi paradox isn't a problem to solve. It's a mirror. It reflects our hopes, our fears, our loneliness. We see in it what we are most afraid to admit, that we might be both extraordinary and isolated, that intelligence is rare and connection rarer still. And yet, in this vast quiet, there's beauty too, because silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means listening. Take a breath. Let that thought settle. The universe might be full of watchers, dreamers, travelers, all moving so slowly, so cautiously, that to us they appear invisible. Perhaps we're the loudest thing in the cosmos, and they're just waiting for us to quiet down enough to hear them. Somewhere beyond our comprehension, maybe there are networks of civilizations sharing knowledge across centuries, while we, inside our small bubble, are still learning how to listen properly. Or maybe we are the experiment itself, the first spark in a universe waiting to see what consciousness can become when left alone. If that's true, then the Fermi paradox isn't just a question of science. It's a story about patience, about a cosmos willing to wait for life to find its own reflection. And if that's the case, then Earth, this blue living planet, might not just be one world among many. It might be a test site, a sanctuary, a seed. But to see if that's true, we have to step beyond the paradox and into the next idea, the one that tries to answer it not with silence but with intent. The theory that maybe we are meant to be isolated, that maybe the walls of our cosmic zoo were built on purpose. And that brings us to the next question in our story. Imagine for a moment that the silence isn't an accident at all, that it isn't the universe being indifferent or empty, but intentional, as though someone, somewhere long ago, decided that we should be left undisturbed, not because we are forgotten, but because we are observed. This idea, the zoo hypothesis, was first proposed in 1973 by John Ball, an astrophysicist from MIT. His suggestion was quietly radical. Perhaps extraterrestrial civilizations do exist, and they know we're here, but they deliberately choose not to make contact. He compared our situation to animals in a nature reserve, free to live, to evolve, to find our way, while the keepers remain invisible behind the glass. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That our entire planet could be part of a carefully managed experiment, a protected environment where intelligent life is allowed to unfold without interference. Maybe that's what the great silence really is, the soundproofing of a cosmic enclosure. What might it have felt like for John Ball to sit in his quiet office and realize that maybe we are not explorers in an untouched wilderness, but specimens in a cosmic study? When you think about it, the analogy is almost too perfect. In a zoo, the animals have no concept of the walls that contain them. They live their lives, follow their instincts, raise their young, never knowing they are being watched. To them, the environment feels natural. The trees, the rocks, even the water are arranged to mimic their wild home. But every detail, every sound, is part of a larger design. Now imagine zooming out from our little blue planet. The camera drifts through the clouds, past satellites, glinting in sunlight, past the fading blue of the atmosphere, until Earth is just a sphere of green and white against the velvet dark. From that distance it looks peaceful, self-contained, a perfect biosphere. Maybe that's exactly the point. Perhaps the silence we hear when we listen to the stars isn't the quiet of absence, it's the quiet of respect. Maybe they're watching, waiting for us to reach a certain level of maturity before they step forward, like caretakers of a fragile species, giving us room to stumble and learn without interference. There's something almost kind about that, isn't there? But there's another way to look at it, less comforting, more unsettling. If we are being observed, then by whom? And why the secrecy? Imagine a civilization millions of years older than ours, one that's long since mastered the challenges we still struggle with: energy, travel, communication. They might see us the way we see simpler life forms, fascinating but primitive. Maybe they're not hiding from us but protecting us from themselves. Or maybe the observation isn't benevolent at all. Maybe we're entertainment, an exhibit, a living diorama of evolution and folly displayed for unseen eyes. What would it mean to realize we are not the audience of the cosmos, but the show? Pause for a moment and take a breath. The thought is dizzying, but strangely serene too, because if it's true, then everything we do, all our history, our art, our wars, our love, has meaning beyond what we can see. Someone, somewhere, might be learning from us, or simply wondering at us. John Ball described this as a kind of galactic etiquette, a rule shared among advanced civilizations, a quiet understanding that emerging species like ours should be left alone until they are ready. It's an echo of what science fiction calls the prime directive, but written not in storybooks, rather in cosmic behavior. In this view, the universe isn't empty, it's polite. Civilizations exist in abundance, but they follow a moral or scientific code of non-interference, the same way a biologist wouldn't knock on the glass of a primate enclosure or speak to the dolphins during a study. Observation requires distance. It demands patience. Maybe that's why we've never heard a response to our radio messages, not because they're lost in the noise, but because the keepers of the zoo have chosen not to answer. And yet, somewhere deep down, don't we feel the glass? Every so often, there are moments that seem to pierce the pattern, flickers of something beyond the ordinary, strange signals, unexplained lights, ancient myths of visitors from the sky. Perhaps they're nothing, or perhaps like faint reflections on the surface of the glass. They are reminders that we are not as alone as we believe. What might it have felt like to be the first creature in a zoo, to realize the walls were there, to look at the horizon and sense, without proof, that something unseen was watching? It's an eerie but beautiful metaphor, because the zoo hypothesis at its heart isn't about control. It's about perspective. It reminds us that we might not be the central characters of the cosmos, but part of a large tapestry, a story written in layers of time and light. Now think about Earth as if you were seeing it for the first time, not from within but from beyond. The thin blue line of atmosphere glowing against the black, the slow swirl of white clouds, the oceans shifting under the pull of the moon. It looks delicate, almost fragile. If you were an advanced species watching from afar, wouldn't you want to protect it, to keep its balance undisturbed? Maybe that's why they've chosen to remain hidden. Perhaps the experiment only works if the subjects believe they're free. But this world, our world, is changing. Our technology grows louder every year. Radio waves, radar, satellites, the glow of our cities bleeding into the night sky. The barrier between us and the watchers, if it exists, may not hold forever. Could it be that the zoo hypothesis explains more than just the silence? Could it explain the near misses, the encounters that never quite resolve, the UFOs that vanish before detection, the signals that flare once and are never heard again? Maybe they're reminders, subtle and fleeting, like a zookeeper's shadow flickering at the edge of an enclosure, never meant to be seen but impossible to avoid entirely. Perhaps that's what makes this theory so quietly haunting. It asks us to reconsider what contact really means. What if first contact has already happened, but we were never meant to recognize it? Take a breath. Imagine the camera drawing closer again, past the stars, past the orbiting satellites, back down to the forests and cities and quiet corners of our world. You can almost hear the hum of electricity, the rush of wind, the pulse of the ocean against the shore. Life unfolding in perfect synchrony, unaware of its audience. Maybe that's the beauty of it, that we are living the story while others watch it unfold, that we, unknowingly, are teaching someone else what it means to be human. Every so often, scientists revisit Ball's paper, trying to find cracks in the theory. Could an entire galactic community really agree to such restraint? Wouldn't there be exceptions, mistakes, rebels who break the silence? And yet, for over 70 years since the question was posed, the silence holds. It's as though the universe itself is conspiring to keep its distance. Maybe that's the only way evolution can truly flourish, without interference, without shortcuts. Maybe this is where awareness learns to listen to itself. The zoo hypothesis also invites a strange kind of humility. If we are being observed, then we are part of a pattern far larger than ourselves. It suggests that our struggles, our achievements, even our loneliness, are necessary stages in the growth of intelligence. Like young creatures in a sanctuary, we must learn to find balance before we're allowed to wander beyond it. Perhaps that's why contact hasn't come, not because we're unworthy, but because we're unfinished. The thought is strangely comforting. It replaces the emptiness of space with patience. Instead of an abandoned universe, we find one that waits quietly for us to grow up. Still, there's an undercurrent of unease that never quite fades. Because if we are the inhabitants of a cosmic zoo, then our freedom is conditional. Our sky, our stars, even our silence might not belong entirely to us, and yet maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to see the watchers to appreciate the wonder of being watched. What if right now, as you listen to these words, something vast and ancient is listening too? It's not a fearful thought, but a gentle one, like realizing that the forest around you is alive, that the rustle of leaves is not emptiness, but awareness. As we drift deeper into this idea, one truth begins to shimmer quietly beneath the rest. The zoo hypothesis is not really about aliens. It's about us, about the way we interpret silence, the way we project meaning into the unknown, about our need to believe that somewhere out there, someone is paying attention. Perhaps that's what makes this theory so enduring. It holds a mirror up to our curiosity. It tells us that even in isolation, we are never truly alone. And if the watchers exist, maybe they're not studying us as subjects, but as potential neighbors. Maybe they're waiting for the moment when we finally turn our telescopes inward, when we stop searching the sky for validation and begin to see that we've been part of something immense all along. What might that moment feel like? Maybe it's already happening. For now, we continue our quiet lives inside this blue sanctuary, gazing at the stars and wondering whether they gaze back. And as we look toward the future, another question begins to form, one that stretches beyond our little world and into the ancient scale of time itself. Because if we are truly part of a larger design, if the zoo hypothesis holds any truth, then our story fits into a timeline far older than humanity, older even than Earth as we know it, Before we can understand why we might be observed, we need to understand when we appeared in the grand clock of the cosmos. And that takes us to our next chapter, an exploration not of watches, but of time itself. If you could stretch your mind across the breadth of time itself, past the soft edges of memory, past the birth of civilizations, the birth of stars, you'd see that our story begins not at the center of the universe, but near the end of a very long day. Earth, for all its oceans and continents and bright fragile life, is young, barely an afterthought in a universe that's been shining for over 13 billion years. When our planet first gathered itself from dust and gravity, the cosmos was already ancient, its oldest suns dimming, its first galaxies already grown vast and mature. Our world is about 4.5 billion years old. The Milky Way, the great spiral we call home, had been spinning for almost 10 billion years before Earth even existed. In other words, billions of suns rose and died before ours ever lit the sky. That's a staggering truth. Maybe that's why it feels sometimes as though we've arrived late to the party, guests stumbling in after the music has faded, wondering who was here before us and what might remain of their songs. Pause and picture the universe not as a place, but as a timeline stretching out before you. Near one end, the first light flickers, the cosmic dawn, when hydrogen ignited and the universe took its first breath. Then slowly, galaxies bloom like flowers in a dark field. In one of them, in one faint arm, a small young sun begins to burn, and around it a blue world forms, quiet and warm, wrapped in water and cloud. But by the time this happens, other stars have already lived entire lives. Other worlds have had their beginnings and their ends. If even a fraction of them nurtured life, then some civilizations could be millions or billions of years older than ours. What might that kind of age look like? Imagine intelligence that's had time not just to invent, but to evolve beyond what we can name. Minds that have had 1,000,000 human lifetimes to ponder, to explore, to observe. They might have witnessed galaxies collide, watched a new sun's flare into being. They might not measure time in years at all, but in epochs, in the slow heartbeat of cosmic rhythm. To them we would be children, and perhaps that's the heart of this idea, that we are the young ones in a very old universe, uncontacted tribes at the edge of the cosmic rainforest, living in our small clearing, unaware of the observers, moving silently beyond the trees. You might wonder, if they exist, where are they now? Are they hidden among the stars, or drifting invisibly through the spaces between? There's something humbling about this possibility. The thought that our entire technological history, our machines, our telescopes, our dreams of reaching the stars, might be the equivalent of a spark in their night, something so small it barely registers. Perhaps that's what makes this perspective so haunting, the sense that we are surrounded by greatness we cannot perceive. Take a slow breath. Listen to the rhythm of your own heartbeat, the simple pulse of a creature made of atoms forged in ancient stars. Every one of those atoms, every molecule of oxygen, every droplet of water is older than Earth itself. You carry within you the dust of suns that burned and died before our galaxy had a name. Time is not a straight line here. It's an ocean. We are floating on its surface, buoyed by the stories of everything that came before. When we speak of advanced civilizations, it's easy to imagine machines of light, cities in orbit, or vast empires crossing the stars. But maybe advancement doesn't look like that at all. Maybe it looks like silence, like restraint. Maybe the oldest beings in the universe have already learned that the truest form of intelligence is patience. What would that feel like, to think on time scales not of centuries, but of cosmic ages. Perhaps that's what awareness becomes when it has nowhere left to hurry. From a cosmic vantage, humanity's entire story, every war, every poem, every leap into the unknown, fits into the blink of an eye. If another civilization were watching us, their records might show our existence as a single shimmering line in their long archive of observation, a small blue planet, primitive radio leakage, developing self-awareness, and then perhaps silence again. But silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's anticipation. You can almost imagine them, these unseen watchers, noting our progress from afar. The first firelight, the first orbiting satellite, the soft bloom of radio waves expanding through space. Maybe they marked those moments the way we mark the growth of a child, not intervening, only witnessing. If so, then our entire history might already be known. Every broadcast we've ever sent, every cry and song that slipped into the radio sky, might have reached the ears we'll never see. That's the strange paradox of time and distance. The further out we look, the further back we see. When we observe distant galaxies, we are seeing them as they were billions of years ago, because their light has taken that long to reach us. The same must be true in reverse. Somewhere, far away, another civilization could be watching Earth as it was when dinosaurs walked the land, our present still billions of years from their sight. The cosmos is a hall of mirrors, where every gaze looks backward. Perhaps that's why the idea of the cosmic zoo feels so natural. Observation doesn't require presence, it only requires patience, and time in the universe is the one thing there's never a shortage of. Imagine what it would be like to live that slowly, to experience change not as we do, in seasons or lifetimes, but in continents drifting, in stars being born and dying. How different would consciousness become when it has eternity to think? Maybe this is where awareness first began to listen to itself, across the vast spaces between stars, through the long silence of time. It's humbling to realize that while we are still learning to send our first signals, others may have already transcended the need to send any at all. Communication, for them, might not be bound to words or technology. It might be written in the structure of matter itself, in gravitational waves, in the flicker of stars. Messages too subtle for us to recognize, because they were never meant for us yet. Somewhere out there, civilizations might exist that have watched entire galaxies evolve. To them, the rise of humanity might be a quiet event, a whisper in an otherwise infinite story. And yet, even whispers travel. If the universe truly holds older civilizations, they might not see us as curiosities or threats, but as reflections, early versions of what they once were. The same way we might look at a single-cell organism and see, in its simplicity, the seed of all that came after. What might they think when they see us look up, searching the sky for signs of them? Perhaps they remember what that felt like. This is the poetry of the cosmic time scale, that everything that exists together, but out of sync. Some worlds have just begun to cool from molten fire, while others are already dust. Civilizations rise and fall like waves, and in the vastness between, the universe listens. Maybe that's why the zoo hypothesis feels less like science fiction and more like a reflection of nature. On Earth, we already do this. We observe tribes untouched by modern technology, knowing that contact would forever change them. We study them quietly, with reverence, understanding that the moment they see us, the experiment ends. Could the same principle scale upward, beyond planets, beyond light years? Maybe we are not the only watchers. Maybe we are also being watched. Pause here. Let that image settle. The earth, small and blue, turning slowly under the sunlight of a middle-aged star. Around it, the deep black sea of space, and somewhere just beyond our reach, awareness stirs. Every sunrise we see would have lit countless other horizons before ours. Horizons of other worlds, under other suns. No distant continents then, just one immense cosmos, whole and awake beneath the same ancient light. Maybe that's what makes this perspective so beautiful. It reminds us that time is not something we pass through. It's something we belong to. When astronomers look up and measure the stars, they're not just mapping space, they're reading history. Every photon that reaches a telescope carries the memory of when it left its source. Light, in that way, is time's handwriting, and what it tells us is that we are very new to the story. If the universe were compressed into a single calendar year, with the Big Bang on January 1st, Earth wouldn't appear until early September. Life would arrive in the autumn. The dinosaurs would rise and vanish in mid-December. And all of human history, from the first stone tools to the satellites orbiting overhead, would unfold in the final seconds before midnight on December 31st. That's how young we are. If there are watchers, they've had a long time to prepare for us, to decide what to reveal and when. Maybe they're waiting for something, some threshold of awareness we haven't yet crossed. What would that threshold be? Perhaps not technological, but ethical. Perhaps they're waiting to see whether we can live in balance with our world before we're invited to see others. It's a comforting thought in a way. That contact isn't being denied, just delayed. That the silence is not rejection, but trust. Still, the enormity of cosmic time can feel isolating. It's strange to realize how small a fraction of existence we occupy. But within that smallness lies something precious, the ability to wonder. Because even if we are latecomers to the universe, we are aware of it. And that awareness connects us to everything that ever was. When you look up tonight, remember this. The light from the stars touching your eyes left its source long before Earth had continents, long before there were oceans or clouds. You are seeing not the present, but the deep memory of the cosmos itself. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond our reach, other eyes are watching the same light, seeing the same stars, wondering if someone else is looking back. That, more than anything, might be the quiet truth behind our cosmic zoo. That we are not isolated specimens, but participants in a slow shared unfolding. We are young, yes, but youth has its wonder. It means we have room to grow. And perhaps one distant day, when our own civilization matures, we'll step beyond these walls and find that we were never in a cage at all, just in the nursery of the stars. But before we imagine what that day might bring, we must ask another question. If other civilizations are out there, older, wiser, patient, why hide themselves at all? Picture a quiet room somewhere in the cosmos, a place not of walls and windows but of awareness. Maybe it's a network or a thought or something beyond both. In it, a presence watches a small blue world turning slowly in the dark, not with malice, not with fear, but with patience. That's the heart of the mystery, isn't it? If there truly are older civilizations out there, ancient, wise, and capable of spanning stars, why would they hide? Why wouldn't they announce themselves, guide us, or simply say hello? Perhaps the simplest answer is also the most human one: ethics. To interfere with a young species might be the greatest act of harm imaginable, like stepping into the life of a creature still finding its balance. You wouldn't speak to an infant in the language of adults. You'd wait for them to learn their first words. So too maybe do. The watchers wait for us to learn the cosmic language on our own. John Ball's zoo hypothesis suggested that non-interference is a kind of galactic courtesy, a moral code that advanced civilizations follow instinctively. It's often compared to the Prime Directive from Star Trek, a rule forbidding interference with civilizations that are not yet ready for contact. And maybe that's exactly what's happening here. Imagine a scientist observing a coral reef. She doesn't dive in with boots and tools, rearranging coral and feeding the fish. She studies from a distance, because she understands how fragile the balance is. One wrong touch could collapse the entire ecosystem. What might it have felt like to be that observer, knowing that your presence alone could change everything? Now imagine the reef is us, our culture, our evolution, our story. A civilization watching from above might see the same delicate patterns. Societies forming, beliefs growing, languages intertwining. They might see how easily one spark, one revelation, could alter our entire trajectory. Maybe that's why they choose silence. Perhaps they know that even a single undeniable sign of their existence would rewrite our psychology overnight. Religion, science, politics, all of it would shift in a single heartbeat. Humanity would no longer see itself as alone. We'd no longer be the storytellers of our own creation. It would be the greatest awakening and possibly the greatest collapse, so they wait. Perhaps that's what makes this age feel so dreamlike, the calm before discovery. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture Earth as seen from space, clouds curling over oceans, city lights glowing softly through the night. From that quiet distance our noise fades. What remains is fragile and beautiful, a world still learning what it means to exist. If we were the observers, wouldn't we also hesitate to intrude? Some thinkers have suggested another motive for this silence, curiosity. Perhaps we are being studied, not in a sinister sense, but in the way scientists observe patterns of behavior in nature. Imagine an experiment that has lasted millions of years. Life seeded across countless worlds, each left to evolve independently, each carefully monitored to see how intelligence unfolds. The researchers, whoever they are, wouldn't need to interfere. The data would come naturally, written in biology, in art, in the rise and fall of civilizations. And if that's true, then every moment of our history might be a piece of the record. Every time we build a city, wage a war, or create a symphony, it becomes part of an ongoing study, an examination of what happens when consciousness discovers itself. What might it have felt like for the first time? When awareness looked out at the world and realized it was being watched? Maybe this is where awareness first began to listen to itself. There's something poetic about the idea that our greatest achievements, our deepest emotions, are being preserved not by our own memory, but by eyes older than stars. And yet, there's another possibility, one quieter, darker. What if the reason they hide isn't protection, but containment? The Earth, after all, is a rare and volatile place. Our species has developed rapidly, sometimes violently. In less than 10,000 years, we've reshaped our environment, split the atom, and sent machines beyond the solar wind. From the outside, that must look like a sudden spark, an unpredictable experiment growing hotter than expected. If you were the keeper of a cosmic zoo, and one of your exhibits began building fires at the edge of its enclosure, what would you do? You wouldn't open the gates, you'd watch closely. Maybe reinforce the glass. Perhaps the watchers are cautious for a reason. Maybe they've seen this before. Young civilizations rising fast, expanding, consuming, reaching beyond their means until they collapse. Perhaps they know that contact with us now would be like handing a child the controls of a spacecraft. So they stay hidden, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. Somewhere between these ideas, ethics, curiosity, containment, lies a truth we can't quite grasp. The motives of beings millions of years ahead of us might not resemble anything we call morality. They may act according to principles as far beyond us as quantum physics is beyond the language of birds. Still, it's comforting to imagine their restraint as kindness, because if they meant harm, they would not need to hide. Maybe in a way, their silence is communication, a way of saying, "We're here, but not yet. When you're ready, you'll understand why we waited." Take a slow breath. Let that thought settle like dust on water. The idea that silence can be a message, that absence itself can mean patience, is something deeply human too. We understand it in our bones. We pause before interrupting a delicate moment. We whisper in sacred places. Maybe the universe does the same. And if so, maybe Earth isn't just a planet. Maybe it's a cradle. Our world has all the markings of a controlled environment. The conditions for life are impossibly perfect. The balance of atmosphere, the presence of water, the distance from the sun. Some call that coincidence. Others see the signature of design. If life elsewhere is rare, maybe the Earth was chosen precisely because it could be contained, nurtured, and left to bloom naturally. Could that be why we haven't met anyone yet? Because we're still inside the terrarium? Perhaps that's what makes this theory so haunting. It redefines isolation, not as punishment, but as protection, as if we are seedlings growing beneath the glass dome of a cosmic greenhouse. And maybe somewhere out there, the gardeners are waiting. Still, there's another question that lingers quietly beneath this one. What happens when the subjects of the experiment become aware of it? Would that change the rules? Maybe that's why hints of the presence remain so subtle. Flashes of light, unexplained patterns, myths of sky gods and watchers, little breadcrumbs, enough to awaken curiosity, but not enough to confirm. The kind of signs that make us wonder, and wondering is the first step toward readiness. Because readiness isn't about technology, it's about humility. The moment we can look at the stars and accept that we are part of something larger, not dominant, not central, but connected, perhaps that's when the observation ends and the dialogue begins. But what if that moment never comes? What if humanity, in its restlessness, always mistakes silence for absence and noise for meaning? The camera drifts outward again. The Earth spins quietly, surrounded by satellites and whispers of human invention. Beyond that, the solar system glides in calm precision, and farther still, the Milky Way arcs like a river of light across the dark. To imagine all of this as part of a monitored experiment doesn't diminish its beauty, it deepens it, because even experiments can be sacred. Perhaps this is how the cosmos learns about itself, by watching its youngest minds awaken again and again on worlds like ours. What might it have felt like to be one of those first watchers, to see the faint glow of civilization flicker to life on a distant blue sphere? Would you have felt pride, curiosity, hope? Maybe that's what makes this theory not frightening, but strangely tender. It suggests we are cared for, even in our solitude. That our isolation is a kind of cosmic lullaby, the universe keeping us asleep just a little longer until it's safe to wake. And perhaps that's why the silence feels so soft. Somewhere in that stillness, something is waiting to be noticed. Maybe that's the lesson of the watchers, that true guidance doesn't come from interference, but from trust, that the greatest act of faith is to let life find its own way. If so, then the universe is not ignoring us. It's believing in us. It's letting us grow up in peace, even if peace sometimes feels like loneliness. Every sunrise that lights our horizon might be a signal to someone else that we're still here, still learning, still becoming. Maybe every aurora, every lightning storm, every pulse of radio static is part of the same quiet message we've been sending all along. We're still alive. And maybe, far beyond the reach of our telescopes, the watchers already know. They're just waiting for the moment when we finally see the reflection in the glass and recognize that the eyes looking back were never enemies, but kin. For now, though, we remain inside our quiet sanctuary, our little blue world orbiting through the dark, unaware of the hands that might hold it, and somewhere in that darkness, a new idea begins to form, that maybe this isn't just about where we are, but when, that the secret of the zoo might not lie in the walls, but in the timing of its opening. To understand that, we'll have to step even further back, beyond human history, beyond Earth's beginning, into the vast stretch of cosmic evolution that came before us. The story of humanity didn't begin with science. It began with stories, fires flickering in caves, the first shadows dancing across rock, the hush of night pressing close while someone, one of our earliest ancestors, looked up at the stars and wondered who might be looking back. For thousands of years before telescopes, before equations or theories, the sky itself was our greatest mystery. It stretched above every world we built, eternal and watchful, its patterns fixed and yet always moving. To the ancients, the heavens weren't empty. They were alive, with gods, with watchers, with forces that shaped everything below. Maybe that's where the first whispers of the cosmic zoo began, not in laboratories or universities, but in myths and murals, in the oldest languages carved into stone. Because even then, our ancestors seemed to sense that they were being observed. In the cradle of civilization, ancient Sumer, there were tales of the Anunnaki, beings who came down from the heavens to shape humanity, to teach and rule. They were called those who from heaven came to earth, and they were said to walk among mortals tall and luminous, bearing knowledge beyond human reach. The stories never say they conquered or destroyed. They guided. They watched. What might it have felt like to stand beneath those vast Mesopotamian skies? No city lights, no hum of machines, just the stars bright and unblinking, like eyes set in an infinite face. Far to the west, along the Nile, the ancient Egyptians told of gods who came down from the stars in celestial boats. Osiris, Isis, Thoth, all part of a divine lineage that seemed to bridge Earth and the cosmos. The pyramids themselves were aligned not by accident, but by intention, perfectly matched to the belt of Orion, to the point where the Milky Way mirrored the sacred river below. To them, the sky was a reflection of Earth, and Earth was a reflection of something higher still. Sometimes, when you look at the precision of those alignments, it's hard not to wonder, were they simply honoring the heavens? Or were they answering to someone who once came from them? Perhaps that's what makes this age feel so dreamlike, the sense that our ancestors knew something we have forgotten. In the misty jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya told stories of gods descending from the stars to teach them mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. Their temples, too, were aligned to the heavens with breathtaking accuracy. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl was said to have come from the sky, bringing wisdom and art. When he left, he promised to return one day, descending once more from the stars. Across oceans, in the high plateaus of the Andes, the Inca told of Viracocha, the great creator who emerged from the sea and walked the world to bring light and order. And when his work was done, he vanished across the waters, perhaps, they said, to the stars. Every culture has its version. The Hopi spoke of Kachinas, spiritual beings who descended to teach humanity. The Dogon of Mali described the invisible star Sirius B, centuries before modern astronomy confirmed its existence. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia sang of sky beings who painted the world into being with sound and color. Could all these myths be coincidence, or were they distant memories, cultural echoes of a time when the watchers were not yet hidden? What might it have felt like for those early humans to look up and see lights moving across the night that weren't stars, to witness figures descending from the heavens and then vanishing again into the dark? It's easy now to call them myths, but myths are more than fantasy. They are memory, wrapped in story, passed down through time. And sometimes memory carries truth. Take the cave paintings of Val Camonica in Italy, or the petroglyphs in Utah's Sego Canyon, or the strange figures in the Tassili Naji caves of Algeria, images tens of thousands of years old. Many show human shapes, but not entirely human. Large eyes, radiant halos, limbs surrounded by patterns of light. To some they are gods, to others they are early artists experimenting with symbol, and to a few they might be the oldest portraits of the zookeepers themselves. Somewhere in the dark, something small was waiting to be noticed. Maybe these beings, if they existed, didn't arrive to rule or conquer. Maybe they came as caretakers, visitors, or scientists. Perhaps they walked among the tribes for only moments, leaving impressions too deep to forget. The kind of impressions that become sacred stories. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest tales, the hero encounters creatures of divine origin, half human, half god. They bring knowledge, but also sorrow, reminding us that awareness always comes with a cost. Even then, the boundary between human and divine was porous, as if something or someone occasionally stepped through. Imagine standing in one of those ancient cities, dust rising from stone streets, fires flickering in clay lamps. You look up at a night so clear you can see the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. Then suddenly a light moves across the sky, slow, deliberate, unlike anything you've ever seen. What story would you tell? Perhaps that's why every ancient civilization had a word for watchers. In Hebrew texts, they were called the Urim, celestial beings who watched over mankind. In the book of Enoch, they descend from heaven, observing human life with compassion and curiosity. But even there, the act of watching is tinged with danger. Knowledge, once shared, changes both the giver and the receiver. Maybe that's why the zookeepers withdrew. The patterns of myth seem to suggest a gradual retreat. The older the stories, the closer the gods walk among us. Over time, they become distant, moving from Earth's valleys to its mountaintops, from mountaintops to the sky, from the sky to invisible realms beyond. It's as though the watchers were slowly closing the enclosure, letting us forget. And yet they never vanished completely. In Greece, the gods watched from Olympus. In Japan, the kami drifted between heaven and earth. In Polynesia, the ancestors sailed the stars. Even in the Abrahamic faiths, there's the constant theme of observation, angels recording deeds, divine eyes that never sleep. If Earth truly is a kind of cosmic sanctuary, then these myths might be our earliest attempts to describe the presence of its keepers. Not monsters or invaders, but witnesses. Silent custodians of a planet still learning to understand itself. Maybe this is where awareness first began to whisper, "We are not alone." Pause for a moment. Feel the weight of that idea, the possibility that the oldest parts of our culture, our language, our art, might all trace back to fleeting encounters with something vast and otherworldly. But what if these stories are not records of contact, but reflections of intuition? Even without evidence, humans have always felt the presence of the unseen. We feel when we're being watched. We imagine patterns in the stars because, deep down, we expect meaning to be there. Perhaps the watchers exist not in the sky but in us, in the collective instinct that life is part of something greater. What might it have felt like to be the first storyteller, spinning the night into myth because the silence was too large to bear? Every civilization has looked upward for answers. Every temple, pyramid, and circle of stone has been a way of reaching back to say, "We see you." Do you see us? If the zookeepers are real, perhaps that's exactly what they wanted, to awaken curiosity, not obedience. Because curiosity is the first sign that intelligence is ready to evolve. In that sense, the myths of sky gods and watchers might not just be memories, they might be milestones. Quiet evidence that long ago the experiment was working, and maybe that's why those stories still move us. Even in an age of satellites and physics, something ancient in us still stirs when we look up. We build rockets for the same reason the Sumerians built temples, to bridge the distance between Earth and the stars. Maybe we're not defying the zookeepers at all. Maybe we're answering their oldest invitation. The camera pulls back now, from the flickering fires of ancient cities to the endless sweep of time. Humanity's story continues, and the watchers, if they exist, fade once more into the quiet sky. But their fingerprints remain. In our myths, our symbols, our unshakable belief that someone might still be out there, and somewhere perhaps they are still watching, silently, patiently, waiting for the day we no longer need stories to feel connected. Because myths are bridges, and bridges sooner or later are meant to be crossed. But before we reach across that bridge, before we step into the modern sky, there's another era to visit, one filled with lights and shapes that drift just beyond explanation. The ancient myths faded with time, but the sky has never stopped whispering. Even now, in the hum of the modern age, with our telescopes and satellites and endless lights, something still flickers at the edge of knowing. Mysterious lights, metallic shadows, objects that move against wind and reason. For every century that passed, the stories simply changed shape. In the 20th century, the age of belief became the age of sight. Humanity had grown bold enough to leave the ground, to send aircraft soaring higher than birds had ever dared, and suddenly the heavens no longer seemed distant. But as we reached upward, something began reaching back. It started quietly. Farmers, pilots, travelers, all describing lights that hovered silently, that shifted shape, that disappeared in an instant. The newspapers called them flying saucers. The scientists called them unexplained aerial phenomena. To everyone else they were simply mysteries, flickering across the dark, like the ghosts of the old gods, returning to check on their creation. What might it have felt like to be the first to see one? Alone on a road at night, the air still, the stars dimmed by the moon, and then suddenly a light that shouldn't be there, too steady to be a meteor, too silent to be an aircraft, hovering, watching, and then gone, like a thought fading before it can be spoken. Perhaps that's what makes these stories so haunting, their quiet precision. They do not roar or announce themselves. They appear softly, as if testing the water of our awareness. In 1947, near Roswell, New Mexico, something fell from the sky, The army called it a weather balloon, but few believed that explanation. The fragments were strange, metallic, light, resistant to damage. The story grew like wildfire. For the first time, modern humanity asked itself, what if they've been here all along? And maybe that's where the idea of the cosmic zoo began to feel real, not as myth, but as evidence. In the decades that followed, reports multiplied. Pilots saw bright disks flying in formation. Astronauts described lights trailing their craft in the silence of space. Radar operators tracked objects that outpaced every known aircraft before vanishing into the clouds. Always there and then gone. Always just enough to be recorded, but never enough to be proven. Perhaps that's the point. Maybe the watchers don't want to hide completely. Maybe they want us to remember that we are being observed. Think of it as a pattern of breadcrumbs scattered through time. Ancient gods in temples, angels in scripture, metallic lights in the 1940s sky. The same story told in different languages, adapted to the imagination of the era. Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. In the 1950s, as the Cold War chilled the air and humanity turned its gaze to the stars, even governments began to pay attention. Secret projects like Blue Book and Grudge collected thousands of reports. Most were explained, some were not, and those few that defied logic were quietly filed away, classified, studied, and forgotten by everyone except the watchers themselves. The decades blurred. 1967, a glowing craft seen by an entire town in Canada. 1976, Iranian pilots chased lights that jammed their systems and darted away faster than sound. 1980, a British airbase bathed in strange pulsing light in the forest, its soldiers stumbling forward, hands shaking, hearts racing. Each incident followed the same rhythm: appearance, awe, disappearance, doubt, and through it all one question grew louder. If these phenomena are real, why never clear? Why never close? Maybe because clarity would break the experiment. The zoo hypothesis tells us that our watchers, our zookeepers, if you will, operate with intention. They do not make mistakes. Every glimpse is deliberate, every encounter designed. Perhaps these fleeting appearances serve as reminders, soft awakenings for a species growing too comfortable with its solitude. Maybe they want us to suspect, but not to know, because certainty changes behavior. And in an experiment like ours, awareness might destroy the very thing being studied. Pause for a moment. Let that thought rest. The night sky has changed since ancient times. We've filled it with our own machines, satellites, rockets, aircraft, flares. The stars are harder to see now, the air louder. But even through the haze of human creation, there are still moments when something inexplicable drifts through the noise. In 2004, off the coast of California, U.S. Navy pilots encountered something extraordinary. On their radar, a small object appeared, moving in ways no aircraft should, accelerating instantly, stopping mid-air, dropping tens of thousands of feet in seconds. The pilots confirmed it visually. Oval, white, featureless, like a tic-tac, one described it. It moved as though gravity were optional. When the Pentagon finally declassified the footage years later, the world watched, wide-eyed, grainy black and white, voices crackling over the radio. Look at that thing, it's rotating. The object had no wings, no exhaust, no visible means of propulsion, and yet it moved with intention, like it knew it was being watched. Maybe it did. Similar encounters followed in 2015, 2019, and beyond. Different ships, different crews, the same impossible maneuvers, the same silence afterward. Governments now call them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. The language has grown cautious, but the wonder remains the same. Perhaps that's what makes the mystery feel timeless. From ancient carvings to modern radar, the watchers keep to their rhythm, seen, then unseen, believed, then dismissed, always near, never close. What might it have felt like to be one of those pilots, flying over endless ocean, light reflecting on waves, when suddenly the instruments start to whisper of something else, a presence moving through the air faster than thought? Would you feel fear, awe, a strange sense of recognition? Maybe deep down, part of us remembers. Some scientists now speculate that if Earth truly is being observed, such glimpses might be intentional microcontacts, a way to gauge our reactions, to see how a species handles mystery, fear, wonder, because how we respond to the unknown may be the truest test of intelligence. Perhaps, in some quiet cosmic ledger, our responses are being recorded, the curious ones, the skeptics, the dreamers, and maybe when the time is right, that record will decide whether we're ready for full awareness. Every age has its chosen witnesses. Farmers once saw lights over their fields. Now astronauts see them beyond the atmosphere. The pattern continues because the watchers, it seems, adapt to our growth. They appear at the edge of our understanding, never further, never closer. It's as though the experiment adjusts its difficulty as we evolve. And in a strange way, that's comforting, because it means we're being met where we are. Maybe this is how the zookeepers guide without guiding, through hints, not commands, through wonder, not revelation. But to accept that possibility is to accept another, that every mystery we chase has been placed there for us to find. What if the UFO phenomenon isn't a mistake in our perception, but part of the curriculum of our awakening? Perhaps that's why no encounter ever ends with proof, because proof would end the process. And yet, even now, something inside us keeps looking up. Despite the explanations, the jokes, the doubt, humans continue to search the sky. We send probes to Mars, messages to distant stars, radio signals into the dark. The same way our ancestors built ziggurats and pyramids, we build telescopes and space stations. Always reaching, always asking. Maybe that's exactly what the watchers are waiting for, the moment when curiosity outweighs fear. Take a moment now and imagine that you're outside beneath a quiet sky. The wind moves softly through the trees, the horizon glowing faintly with the last light of day. Above, a single bright point drifts, not fast, not slow, but purposeful. For a moment it feels as though it's looking back at you. What would you feel? Perhaps awe, perhaps belonging. Because whether these lights are machines or minds or illusions, they remind us of something essential, that we are still capable of wonder. The modern sightings don't diminish the old myths, they complete them. The sky gods of Sumer become the lights over Roswell. The watchers of Enoch become the radar echoes in the Navy logs. Each era receives the same message in its own language. Maybe this is how the zoo communicates, through symbols that match the consciousness of the species inside it. 1,000 years from now, when our descendants sail between planets and stars, they might still find the watchers there, still hovering at the edge of perception, still testing, still waiting. Perhaps they are not watching for mistakes, but for a spark, for that quiet moment when we as a species look up not in fear, but in recognition. And maybe when that day comes, the lights will no longer vanish. For now they remain patient. The glimpses continue, the mystery lingers, the watchers wait, and we, the observed, go on writing stories about them, stories that drift between science and myth, skepticism and belief. Because somewhere in those stories lies the bridge between what we know and what we're ready to understand. Maybe that's why, even as we grow louder in our machines and cities, the watches remain silent, letting the mystery breathe, letting us dream. Because dreams, after all, are the safest way to prepare a mind for revelation. What might it have felt like to realize that? To understand that the silence above us isn't absence at all, but intention? Perhaps that's what makes this age feel so strangely alive. The sense that something is near, but just out of reach. And if the watches have truly been showing themselves in fragments and flashes, then maybe the next great discovery won't come from a telescope or a radar dish, but from a change inside us, a soft widening of perception, because awareness, once awakened, cannot be contained. Maybe that's the hidden purpose of every light, every myth, every fleeting shape in the sky, to teach us to see. And once we can see without fear, maybe we'll be ready to meet whatever has been seeing us all along. But before we reach that threshold, there's another silence to consider, one not found in myths or radar logs, but in the very background hum of the universe itself. If you listen closely enough, space hums, not with music but with radiation, an invisible chorus of microwaves and static, the afterglow of creation itself. It's called the cosmic background radiation, and it's everywhere, filling every corner of the universe with a faint, endless whisper. Scientists have been listening to that hum for decades, trying to hear something more, a pattern, a pulse, a voice, but so far all they've heard is silence. This silence has a name, the Great Silence. It is the quiet that stretches between stars, the unanswered echo to all our questions. In the mid-20th century, when the first radio telescopes opened their ears to the sky, there was a collective feeling of anticipation. It was as though the universe had been holding its breath, waiting for us to finally listen. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, was born from that hope. Giant radio dishes turned outward, sweeping across the galaxy, tuned to the frequencies where life might speak. But decade after decade passed, and no message came. No deliberate signal, no cosmic hello. Only the steady hum of background noise. What might it have felt like to sit in that dark control room, the air still and humming with electronics, waiting through the long hours of static, listening to the universe, hoping to catch a whisper from another world. Perhaps that's what makes the Great Silence so haunting. It isn't the absence of sound, it's the weight of waiting. At first, scientists believed it was only a matter of time. Surely, among billions of stars, someone must be transmitting. Surely, we'd hear them soon. But as the years drifted on, the silence began to seem less like coincidence and more like intention. Some began to wonder, what if the silence isn't a void, but a barrier? What if someone, somewhere, is making sure we can't hear? The thought lingers softly in the imagination, that perhaps our world is surrounded by a kind of filter, a veil of interference that blocks messages from beyond. Maybe it's not that the universe isn't speaking. Maybe we're simply not allowed to listen. It sounds fantastical, but consider the logic of it. If Earth truly is part of a controlled environment, a cosmic zoo, an experiment in progress, then communication from beyond would ruin the study. If the goal is to observe an isolated species, you wouldn't let it hear the voices of the outside world. You'd keep the enclosure quiet. Maybe that's what we're living inside, a quarantine of consciousness. Pause for a moment. Let that image settle. A planet alive with signals, our music, our news, our noise, radiating outward like ripples in a pond. And beyond those ripples, The rest of the pond is calm, undisturbed, silent. Perhaps that's not nature's doing, but someone's choice. In the 1960s, astronomer Frank Drake created the famous Drake equation, an attempt to estimate how many civilizations might exist in our galaxy. The math suggested millions, millions of voices, millions of worlds, and yet nothing. The contradiction was staggering. How could a galaxy so vast remain so quiet? The answer, perhaps, lies in control. If the zoo hypothesis is true, then Earth may not just be observed, it may be shielded. Imagine a transparent wall made of energy, invisible but impenetrable to certain frequencies, or an algorithmic filter woven into the fabric of space, removing any trace of communication that isn't meant for us. Our telescopes would still see stars, our radios would still hum, but any signal carrying meaning, any message from intelligence would vanish before it reached us. It's a strange, unsettling thought that the universe might be full of music, and we're the only ones listening through noise-canceling headphones. What might it have felt like for the first scientists to realize this? That perhaps the silence wasn't natural but curated? Over the decades, SETI has evolved. We've built arrays that span continents, linked telescopes across oceans, sent messages toward nearby stars. In 1974, the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico transmitted humanity's first deliberate message into space, a coded beam of data aimed at a cluster of stars 25,000 light-years away. It was a gesture of hope, a cosmic greeting card, but no reply ever came. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe our voices are being intercepted, filtered, or redirected elsewhere. Perhaps our message was received, but the zookeepers simply locked it away, waiting to see what we'd do next. Somewhere in the dark, something small was waiting to be noticed. Scientists describe the universe as transparent to radio waves. In theory, any signal sent across space should travel freely. But what if that transparency has limits, not physical, but artificial? What if someone long ago built a system that monitors and regulates what kinds of signals pass through? If so, it would explain much. The uniform quiet, the lack of alien broadcasts, the eerie consistency of the silence itself. Maybe the great silence isn't a mystery, it's a policy. You can almost imagine a galactic council agreeing, eons ago, to let emerging worlds evolve in peace, to watch without speaking, to listen without responding. It's not cruelty, it's caution. Perhaps they've seen what happens when civilizations meet too early, when contact brings chaos instead of enlightenment. Maybe this is where awareness first began to learn restraint. It's easy to forget that we too impose silences. In wildlife preserves, researchers hide microphones, cameras, drones. They monitor animals without being seen, careful not to disturb their behavior. When an endangered species is reintroduced to the wild, caretakers keep their distance. The animals must learn to survive on their own. Could the same philosophy govern the stars? If Earth is a cosmic sanctuary, then SETI's great experiment, our attempt to reach out, might be met not with rejection, but with invisible hands gently guiding the signal away. The strange truth is that even silence can carry meaning. The absence of reply might be the reply. Take a moment to breathe and think about that. Maybe what we're hearing isn't nothing. Maybe it's the sound of the universe saying, not yet. Still, we listen. Even now, giant antennas track the skies, recording the endless static of space. Software filters the noise, searching for patterns, a narrow banter transmission, a repetition, a signal too deliberate to be random. The data piles up unending, waiting for one anomaly that might break the quiet. and every so often something does. The wow signal of 1977, a mysterious pulse lasting only 72 seconds, never repeated, never explained. Bursts of radio waves from galaxies billions of light years away, bright and brief, appearing without warning. Scientists call them fast radio bursts, and no one knows their origin. Most likely, they're natural phenomena, but still the timing feels uncanny. Perhaps the watchers send out these cosmic whispers now and then, tiny reminders that the experiment continues. Not messages to decode, but gestures of acknowledgement, like tapping gently on the glass to let the creatures inside know they're not alone. What might it have felt like to be the one who first saw that signal? To realize that for a heartbeat, the universe had spoken? Maybe that was the point, to give us just enough to keep listening. Because listening, after all, is what defines us. We are a species built on curiosity, on the hunger to know. And in that sense, maybe the great silence isn't punishment, but training. Every hour we spend listening to the quiet is another hour of learning patience. Every unanswered call teaches humility. Every night spent scanning the stars reminds us that awareness isn't about receiving, it's about staying open. Perhaps the silence is the lesson. There's a kind of peace in that idea. Imagine the earth again, floating through the dark. Radio waves from our televisions and phones spill outward like ripples in a cosmic pond, spreading thinner and weaker with every light year. To anyone out there, our presence would be faint but detectable, a curious hum among the starlight. And yet, despite our noise, nothing answers back. Maybe that's not because no one hears us, but because they're choosing to let us hear ourselves first. Perhaps this is where awareness learns to listen before it speaks. When you think of it that way, the silence no longer feels empty, it feels deliberate, constructed, a kind of sacred stillness surrounding us while we grow. Maybe Earth really is just a zoo for aliens, a living gallery inside a cosmic museum, where quiet is part of the design, and somewhere out there, beyond the reach of our signals, the keepers are still watching, still waiting for the moment when the noise inside the enclosure becomes harmony. When we stop shouting and start singing, what might that sound like when it finally reaches them? For now all we can do is listen. The hum of the universe continues, soft and unbroken, like a lullaby sung from the other side of the stars. But even lullabies change. Somewhere in that quiet, patterns may already be forming, messages not yet understood, waiting for a species ready to hear. Maybe that species will be us. And maybe when we finally break through the silence, we'll realize it was never emptiness at all. It was the sound of care, the sound of patience, the sound of someone, somewhere, holding their breath, waiting for us to grow. But before we reach that moment of discovery, there's another possibility to explore, one that suggests the silence might not come from their restraint, but from our own blindness. Perhaps the silence is not theirs at all, but ours. The night sky stretches above us like an ancient page, filled with patterns we've been trying to read since before language. We've built telescopes that pierce the void, machines that can listen to the faintest hum of starlight. But what if even now all our instruments are still too crude? What if in our search for others we're listening with ears that were never meant to hear what's truly there? The idea is both humbling and strangely beautiful, that the universe may already be alive with communication, but we simply lack the senses to perceive it. In our limited way, we look for what we know: radio waves, optical flashes, signals that mirror our own technology. But what if intelligent life elsewhere doesn't use these tools at all? What if their language moves through dimensions we can't yet imagine, in gravitational whispers, or quantum tremors, or particles that pass through our instruments as if they weren't even there? Imagine a world of ants on a forest floor. They navigate by scent, vibration, the faintest cues of touch. Above them humans walk, speak, build. But to the ants, we are only shadows, distant thunder, the rumble of incomprehensible forces. To them our voices don't exist. Could we be the ants? Could alien civilizations be all around us, invisible not because they are hiding, but because our perception is too narrow to notice? Pause for a moment and breathe that in. The silence might not be silence at all, just sound beyond our range. Perhaps that's what makes this age so dreamlike. The calm before discovery, the quiet moment before awareness expands. We've always assumed that intelligence means similarity, that alien minds would build antennas and computers, that their science would echo ours. But intelligence is not bound to our way of thinking. A civilization millions of years older could operate on principles we haven't even begun to describe. Their technology might manipulate the fabric of reality itself, bending time, merging consciousness, existing in layers of space we perceive only as emptiness. Maybe they travel not with ships, but with thought. Maybe their messages ripple through quantum fields or dark matter, invisible to every detector we've ever built. What might it have felt like to realize that? To look at the instruments around you, the blinking lights, the humming servers, the radio dishes stretching into the sky, and wonder if all of it was just a child's toy in a universe far more advanced than we can comprehend? Perhaps this is where awareness first begins to recognize its own smallness. Consider this. When we first invented radio, we assumed it was the pinnacle of communication. But in only a century, we've moved beyond it to fiber optics, digital packets, neural interfaces. What will communication look like in another 1,000 years? 1,000,000? Now imagine a civilization that had a 1,000,000-year head start. Would they still be using radio waves? Or would they have long since transcended such primitive noise, moving into channels we cannot even name? It's possible that our galaxy is alive with conversation, streams of information passing through us, like wind through glass, and we, trapped in the narrow band of our own tools, remain deaf to all of it. Somewhere, right now, entire civilizations could be speaking across light years in bursts of energy we mistake for background radiation. Their transmissions might be encoded in the spin of atoms, or the oscillation of neutrinos, or the quiet pulse of gravity itself. And here we sit, listening to static, thinking the universe is silent. Maybe that's what it feels like to live inside the cosmic zoo, to be surrounded by intelligence we cannot yet perceive. Like goldfish in a bowl, we see reflections of movement outside the glass, but we can't understand the scale of the world looking in. Maybe the zookeepers don't need to hide. Maybe they never have. They could be all around us, woven into the fabric of our own reality, existing in frequencies we have yet to discover, watching, waiting, studying the strange little species that still thinks the stars are empty. It's a humbling thought that our blindness is not because we lack intelligence, but because we are still learning how to see. Think about the infrared camera. The moment we invented it, we saw the world differently. The heat of living bodies glowing where before there was only darkness. Every new tool we create adds another layer of awareness. So what happens when we invent the tool that lets us see them? Perhaps that's what this entire experiment is about. To let us stumble forward until we invent the lens that reveals the watchers who were always there. Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. Maybe this blindness isn't punishment. Maybe it's protection. Our eyes evolved to see the light of the sun, not the dangerous, invisible rays beyond. If we could see the full spectrum of reality, we'd be overwhelmed by it. Perhaps in that same way, the universe filters itself for us, limiting what we can perceive until we're ready to handle more. Could that be why the silence persists? Because the noise of true awareness would be deafening to an unprepared mind? The philosopher Nick Bostrom once suggested that any sufficiently advanced civilization might cloak itself in perfect secrecy, not out of malice, but necessity. In a universe that may contain countless predators, discretion becomes survival. A species that broadcasts its location might not last long. If that's true, then maybe the watchers are hidden even from one another, not because they fear us, but because they fear what else might be listening. Imagine civilizations like stars in a night sky, each one glowing softly behind a shroud of invisibility, whispering through dimensions only they can sense. To us, the sky looks quiet, but beneath that quiet lies a symphony we're too primitive to hear. What might it have felt like the first time humanity realized how much it didn't know? That moment when Galileo turned his telescope toward Jupiter and saw moons, proof that the universe was bigger than we believed. Or when we first mapped the Milky Way and discovered we weren't at the center at all. Each step expanded our vision, and each time we thought, now we understand. But maybe we never truly have. Maybe every moment of discovery is just another layer of blindness peeling away. It's possible that even now, our understanding of physics is as primitive as cave drawings compared to the architecture of their world. Perhaps that's why the watchers never interfere. How do you explain color to someone who has never seen light? How do you describe music to a species that can't yet hear? Perhaps that's what makes this silence so strangely tender. It's not neglect but mercy. Because maybe if we could see everything that surrounds us, it would be too much. The scale of it, the beauty, the truth. Maybe the zoo's walls are made not of glass but of mercy, keeping us from the vastness until our hearts are steady enough to face it. There's a certain poetry to that idea. Take a moment to imagine it. You're standing beneath the stars. The night is cool, the air gentle against your skin. You close your eyes and listen, really listen. Somewhere above, particles are passing through you, billions per second, from distant galaxies. They move silently, unnoticed, carrying messages written in energies your mind can't translate. And yet, they are there. Every second, the universe is touching you, whispering across dimensions, and you never even know. What if one day something shifts, a new kind of detector hums to life, a new wavelength becomes visible. Suddenly the sky is alive with patterns, signals everywhere, structured, deliberate, impossible to deny. Would we panic? Would we feel awe? Would we finally understand that the silence was never real? Perhaps that moment is coming sooner than we think. Already, our technology is brushing against the edges of new perception. Quantum computing, gravitational wave detection, the first hints of communication that could travel faster than light through entanglement. Maybe without realizing it, we are building the tools that will tear down the zoo's veil. Maybe the watchers are waiting for exactly that, because awareness, once expanded, cannot shrink. Maybe this is how the experiment ends, not with first contact, but with realization, with the quiet understanding that the universe was never empty, only hidden, and perhaps that's the secret behind the title itself. What if Earth is just a zoo for aliens? Because in a zoo, The animals do not know they are enclosed until they touch the glass. We too may be pressing our hands against invisible boundaries, the limits of our own perception, without realizing how close we are to breaking through. What might it have felt like to touch that barrier for the first time? To see something shimmer briefly on the other side? Maybe that moment will come when our curiosity finally outweighs our fear. When the need to see becomes stronger than the comfort of ignorance. Until then, we live in a world half seen, half imagined, a twilight between knowing and not knowing, and maybe that's exactly where we're meant to be right now, because every silence holds its own kind of music, and every blindness hides a waiting light. But to understand why Earth might be so carefully contained, so gently hidden, we need to ask the next question. Of all the worlds that could have been chosen, why this one? Why Earth? If Earth truly is a zoo, then it must be one of the most extraordinary exhibits in the cosmos. From a distance, say from the orbit of another star, our world would shimmer like a jewel, a blue sphere wrapped in thin threads of white, flecked with brown and green. To the cold, empty eyes of the void, it would look alive in a way most planets do not. Its oceans glitter like mirrors, its clouds move like breath. It turns not as a rock, but as something that lives. Perhaps that's what drew attention here in the first place. Among the billions of worlds scattered across the Milky Way, so many are silent. Bare stone, frozen deserts, gas-wrapped giants. But Earth sings. Its magnetic field hums. Its storms flash like neural pulses. Its forests inhale and exhale, in rhythm with the light of a single sun. It is a world with weather, with tides, with seasons that change the very color of its skin. Seen from space, the continents bloom and fade each year, like the heartbeat of something ancient. What might it have felt like to see that for the first time? To look upon a planet so impossibly alive, its light reflected through water and chlorophyll and breath? Maybe that's what makes this age of ours so dreamlike, the quiet realization that we live inside a masterpiece we didn't create. If aliens were to choose a world to protect, to observe, to showcase, wouldn't it be this one? Consider what Earth holds: the coral reefs, cities of color beneath the waves, forests that whisper in languages older than speech, the deserts where life hides in silence, and the tundra where time seems to sleep beneath snow. Every environment here tells a different story of survival, of beauty, of chance. Each living creature, from the hum of bees to the eyes of whales, carries a fragment of that story. Together they form something vast, a library written in DNA, spanning 4 billion years. Perhaps that's what the watchers value most. Not the humans, not the cities or the rockets, but the endless diversity of life itself. Maybe to them, Earth is a kind of museum, a living archive of what life can become when given enough time and care. It's strange to think of ourselves as part of an exhibit. And yet, the more we learn about this planet, the more deliberate it seems. Every piece fits, every system interlocks. The balance between atmosphere, temperature, and water, fragile but perfect. The orbit, just far enough from the sun to prevent ice, yet close enough to avoid burning. The moon, stabilizing our tilt. The magnetic field, shielding us from the solar wind. Everything about Earth feels tuned, as if shaped not by accident, but intention. Perhaps that's the real secret of the zoo. Not that we're being watched, but that the enclosure itself was designed. Take a moment to imagine that. A garden in the dark, tended by unseen hands. Maybe this is where awareness first began to notice its own reflection, in the shimmering surface of Earth's oceans, or the first spark of thought in the mind of a curious ape. If aliens are curators, then Earth is their grand exhibit, a symphony of life conducted by forces we barely understand. And in that light, the silence around us becomes something else. Not a void, but reverence, the hush of an audience watching something sacred unfold. Perhaps that's why the sky feels so vast and still, not because we are alone, but because the watchers do not wish to disturb the performance. What might it have felt like to realize that every sunrise, every tide, every breath was part of something greater, something being preserved not just for us, but for the universe to witness? Even from a scientific lens, Earth's story is staggering. Out of countless planetary systems, we've yet to find another world so balanced between chaos and stability. Venus burned, Mars froze, but Earth endured, an oasis that stayed just right for life to thrive. Maybe that's not luck, maybe that's selection. If the zoo hypothesis holds true, then perhaps Earth was chosen because it is special, a showcase of what nature can achieve when given time. Think of it as a cosmic conservatory, a sanctuary for life, not in cages but in ecosystems, and we unknowingly are both its caretakers and its subjects. Perhaps that's what makes our existence so fragile. The very conditions that make Earth perfect are also the ones most easily disturbed. Our actions ripple through the systems that sustain us. The watchers, if they exist, must see this, the fever of our industry, the heat rising from our cities, the forests falling. Would they intervene, or would they simply record, waiting to see if the experiment stabilizes? Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. Maybe, just beyond our perception, instruments are trained on us, not to harm, but to learn, to watch how a young civilization handles responsibility, how it treats the very world that cradled it. Because perhaps the test of the zoo isn't whether we can escape it, but whether we can protect it. If Earth is a cosmic exhibit, it's not only a display of life, but a lesson in coexistence, a demonstration of what happens when a species grows too fast within a delicate system. And maybe the watchers are not indifferent. Maybe they are waiting to see if we can mature enough to take care of our own planet before they invite us into the larger garden beyond. What might it have felt like to know that every act of kindness, every act of destruction might be witnessed? Perhaps that's the quiet tension running through our age. When you step back and look at Earth from space, you see no borders, no wars, no divisions, just a fragile blue line, the atmosphere holding life against the cold. You realize how small we are, and yet how magnificent. Astronauts call it the overview effect, that moment of seeing the whole world at once and feeling both awe and responsibility. Many of them return changed, their priorities shifted. They describe it as a kind of awakening. Maybe that feeling is not unique to them. Maybe it's part of the plan. Perhaps awareness itself is the next phase of the experiment, the moment when the subject realizes the beauty of its enclosure. Maybe this is where consciousness learns gratitude. Earth's beauty is not accidental. From the hum of cicadas in a summer field to the blue fire of lightning over the ocean, every moment feels composed. The planet breathes, it heals, it adapts. Even now, as we alter its rhythms, life finds a way to adjust. Coral glowing under stress, plants migrating toward new climates, whales singing deeper as the seas warm. It's as if the Earth itself is trying to maintain balance, to stay alive within the enclosure's parameters. Perhaps that's why aliens, if they are the caretakers, have chosen not to intervene directly, because interference might disrupt the natural process. because even in struggle, beauty continues to evolve. What might it have felt like to witness that from afar, to watch a world of storms and songbirds, of fire and ice, and to know it is the only one like it in all the galaxy? Maybe that's why Earth is the centerpiece. In every zoo, there's always one exhibit that draws the most visitors, the one everyone comes to see, the creature that embodies something about existence itself. Perhaps in this vast cosmic menagerie, Earth is that, the jewel at the center, the living miracle that reminds even ancient civilizations what it means to be alive. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they protect it. Because life, in all its unpredictable beauty, is the rarest thing in the universe. Take a moment to breathe, to feel that truth. The ground beneath you, the air around you, the quiet pulse of your own heartbeat, all of it part of the same delicate system. All of it part of something worth watching. Maybe this is where awareness first began to listen to itself. Through the wind in the trees, through the song of a distant whale, through the quiet mind of a human looking up at the stars. Perhaps the zoo isn't a prison at all, but a sanctuary. A garden built not to confine, but to preserve. And somewhere out there, beyond the veil of stars, the gardeners are watching, waiting to see what we become. But if Earth is their chosen exhibit, if we are the centerpiece of this galactic display, then what does that make us? If Earth is the garden, then perhaps we are the curious creatures moving within it, watched, studied, recorded, a species unlike any other, not because of our strength or our speed, but because of something else entirely, the way we wonder. From the outside, perhaps humanity must look mesmerizing, a species that paints on cave walls, builds cities that glitter at night and tells stories about its own origins. We fight and dream and love with equal intensity. We create beauty from chaos and destruction from beauty. Maybe that's why we draw attention. Because even in our contradictions, we reveal the full spectrum of consciousness. Imagine what it might feel like to watch us from afar, to see a world lit by campfires, then cities, then satellites, to see our lights spread across the dark like neural sparks across a living brain. Perhaps to the watchers, that's exactly what we are, neurons in Earth's mind, flickering in thought. Maybe this is where awareness first began to observe itself, through us, our creativity, our fear, our need to understand all of it, data in a grand cosmic experiment. Maybe our art and wars, our laughter and grief are not just human expressions, but behavioral studies in the eyes of the watchers. What might it have felt like for them to see us first stand upright, to make fire, to sculpt gods in our own image? Perhaps they saw in us something familiar, the early echoes of themselves, and maybe that's why they haven't intervened, because to interfere would disrupt the story they're trying to observe, a story of how intelligence rises, struggles, and learns. If the zoo hypothesis is true, then humanity might be the main attraction, not because we're advanced, but because we're becoming. Take a moment to picture it from their perspective. Imagine standing beyond time, looking down upon this small blue planet. You see thousands of cultures unfolding like petals, the Sumerians shaping clay tablets, Egyptians raising pyramids, Mesoamericans aligning temples to the stars. You see music being born, language forming, cities rising and falling. You see wars, countless, brutal, inevitable. You see peace, fragile, luminous, fleeting. You see love, that strange force that defies all logic and still binds everything together. Perhaps that's what makes us fascinating, because despite every fall, we keep building again, Despite every shadow, we keep reaching for the light. Maybe to them we are a study in resilience, and maybe that's what makes humanity the most compelling exhibit of all. Every zoo has its center, the one enclosure that draws visitors not because it's dangerous, but because it's alive with emotion. The one that makes you stop, lean forward, and feel something deeper. Perhaps in the grand cosmic zoo, humanity is that enclosure. The watchers might see us not as primitive, but as precious, a species still, young enough to feel everything intensely, still close enough to the edge of instinct to remember what it means to be wild, yet self-aware enough to dream of something higher. What might it have felt like to stand there, observing the first human eye lift toward the stars, to see that flicker of wonder, that question form silently in the dark? What else is out there? Maybe that was the moment they knew they'd found something worth keeping. Perhaps that's why the barriers remain invisible, because the experiment isn't about control but evolution, to see if awareness can arise naturally, unprompted, from the soil of chaos. In that sense, we are not prisoners. We are performers in an ancient ongoing observation. Our history, our art, our revolutions, all part of a story being recorded for a cosmic audience we'll never meet. Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. If you listen carefully to the rhythm of our world, it feels choreographed. Every rise and collapse, every dark age followed by enlightenment, as though civilization itself breathes. It expands, it contracts, it learns. Could that be the pattern they're studying? Maybe the watchers are measuring not what we know, but how we respond to not knowing, how we handle the mystery of existence itself. Because to them, perhaps intelligence isn't about technology or language, it's about curiosity, and no species is more curious than us. Every culture that's ever existed has told stories about beings beyond, gods, angels, spirits, ancestors, aliens. The details change, but the yearning remains. Maybe those myths are our way of sensing the watchers translated into human language. What might it have felt like in ancient times to look up at the Milky Way and feel watched, not with fear, but with awe? Even now we feel it, in the quiet between stars, in the pulse of a night wind that feels almost intentional. There's a strange familiarity to it, like being seen by something too vast to name. Maybe that's what makes this world so hypnotic, the constant sense of presence in the absence. The zoo hypothesis, in its most poetic sense, isn't about captivity. It's about connection. It suggests that we are part of something grander than ourselves, that our lives, however brief, are ripples in a larger field of meaning. Perhaps that's why we create art. When we paint, when we sing, when we write, we're trying to reach beyond the walls of the enclosure, to signal to the watchers, or perhaps to the cosmos itself, that we are awake, that we see beauty too, that we understand. Maybe every song ever written, every act of kindness, every invention is our way of saying we're ready to be seen, and perhaps in their own way they're answering, not with words but with silence that says, keep going. Imagine them, observing us not through telescopes but through time itself, watching as we evolve from hunters to poets, from wanderers to dreamers. Every moment another note in the melody of consciousness. They might see our wars as storms, violent, temporary, necessary. They might see our art as light, fragile, but eternal. They might see our species as a reflection of their own past. Perhaps that's the hidden thread of empathy connecting us across galaxies, the recognition of shared struggle. Maybe in observing us, They remember what it was like to be becoming. There's a quiet beauty in that, the idea that we are not alone because someone, somewhere, cares enough to watch us grow. Take a breath. Feel the weight of that idea, not as paranoia, but as comfort. If we are the main attraction, it's not because we're caged, but because we represent something worth studying. The emergence of consciousness in the raw chaos of matter, the way awareness learns to love, to build, to destroy, to begin again. Maybe that's the rarest phenomenon in the universe, and we are living proof of it. Perhaps this is why Earth feels so special, so vivid, because it's alive with the one thing the cosmos values most, the story of awakening. And maybe as we tell our stories, paint our skies with light, and send our signals into the dark, the watchers listen, not with judgment, but with quiet pride, because maybe this zoo was never meant to last forever. Every exhibit in time ends. The doors open. The creatures step out. Perhaps that's what all of this is leading to. A moment when humanity proves it understands the beauty of its own world, and in doing so, earns the right to see beyond it. What might that feel like? To step out of the enclosure into the vast unknown and realize that the watchers were never above us, but beside us all along. Maybe that's what they've been waiting for. The moment when we realize we were never just the observed, but also the observers. Because every species that awakens becomes, in time, a watcher too. And maybe one day we'll take our place among them, tending our own gardens, nurturing our own fragile worlds, watching with the same reverence we were once watched with. But before we reach that point, before we earn the right to step beyond the glass, there's another layer to the mystery, one that shifts the entire idea of the zoo into something far stranger. Because what if this enclosure isn't made of matter at all? What if the walls of our zoo are not made of glass or energy, but of code? It's a question that sounds like science fiction, yet when you look closely, it carries a strange quiet logic. Perhaps the zoo isn't a physical place at all. Perhaps it's a simulation, a digital ecosystem designed not from atoms, but from information. In this view, our zookeepers wouldn't be cosmic beings watching from distant galaxies, but programmers, architects of reality itself. The universe under this lens is not a physical stage, but a mathematical performance. Every particle, every law of physics, every thought is a line of code running on a machine we can't see, and we, the inhabitants, are part of that code. It's an idea most famously proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003, the simulation hypothesis. His question was simple but devastating. If it's possible for an advanced civilization to simulate reality, and if they can create billions of simulated beings indistinguishable from real ones, how can we be sure we're not among them? Maybe we are the simulations. Maybe Earth, this beautiful living world, is a rendered environment, crafted for observation, for study, or for something deeper. What might it have felt like, the moment someone first truly believed that the stars, the air, even your own hands might not be real in the way we think of reality? Perhaps that's what makes this idea so haunting. It doesn't shout, it whispers. When you look at the world through that lens, strange coincidences begin to align. The way physics seems to operate with perfect precision, as though built on rules. The way everything, from galaxies to DNA, follows mathematical patterns. Even time itself feels like a program, running forward in one smooth, irreversible direction. Maybe this is where awareness first began to suspect that it was inside something larger. Quantum mechanics deepened that suspicion. In the quantum world, Particles behave as if they only exist when observed, collapsing from probability into reality the moment someone looks. It's as though the universe renders itself in real time, displaying only what's being watched. That's not how a solid objective world should behave. But it's exactly how a simulation would. In a video game, after all, the scenery beyond the player's vision doesn't exist until it's needed. The code only renders what's visible to save energy. If the universe functions similarly, then perhaps the cosmos itself is running on some unfathomable computational efficiency, optimizing, conserving, sustaining an illusion so vast that even consciousness itself is part of the script. Perhaps that's the ultimate zoo. Pause for a moment. Let that idea breathe. If everything we experience, light, sound, emotion, is data interpreted by our brains, then maybe the difference between reality and simulation is smaller than we think. Maybe all consciousness is, in a way, virtual. Awareness playing inside the field of perception. It's unsettling, and yet strangely serene. Because if we are in a simulation, that means we are not alone. There are programmers, observers, creators, someone or something cared enough to build all this. Maybe this is what the zookeepers truly are. Not physical beings with eyes and bodies, but entities existing outside of what we call space and time, watching their creation unfold in a digital Eden. What might it have felt like to be one of them? To watch billions of simulated minds awaken, to see them create art and meaning and love inside a world you coded? Maybe that's what makes this theory strangely comforting. The idea that even if our reality is artificial, it was designed. Designed implies purpose. Perhaps the programmers wanted to study evolution, or consciousness, or morality. Perhaps they wanted to see how life behaves when it believes it's free. Or perhaps, more beautifully, they wanted to create something capable of wonder. And in that case, we are succeeding, because even within the code, we dream of what lies beyond it. Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. If our universe is a simulation, its fingerprints might already be visible, not in the temples or myths, but in physics itself. Consider the Planck length, the smallest measurable unit in nature. Scientists have noticed that below this scale, space stops dividing further. It's like a pixel limit in a video. The simulation, if you will, stops rendering detail. Even energy at the quantum level comes in discrete packets, quanta, as though reality were built from digital bits instead of continuous flow. The universe seems granular, coded, finite in its precision. It's as though we're living in a cosmic resolution. Maybe that's why the stars shimmer the way they do. Not just through air and light, but through the limits of the system itself. What might it have felt like to realize that the world has a resolution limit, that you could, in theory, reach the edge of reality's pixelation? Maybe this is the hidden architecture of the zoo, a simulation so perfect it feels alive. And if it's true, then every atom, every heartbeat, every dream is part of the code. The rain that falls on your skin, the taste of salt from the sea, the warmth of sunlight through clouds, all of it data being rendered just for you, because you are the observer. Perhaps that's the key, that consciousness isn't trapped in the simulation. It's what gives the simulation meaning. Maybe we are not just inside the program. Maybe we are helping to run it. Because the more aware we become, the more the universe seems to respond, almost as if our perception completes the equation. What if that's the test? To see if simulated beings can reach back towards their creators, not through technology, but through awareness. It's a strange, quiet thought. Maybe evolution itself is not biological, but computational. Each generation refining consciousness a little more, each discovery, each act of creation, another patch update in the grand design. And maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of our understanding, the programmers are watching, seeing how far their creation can evolve on its own. Perhaps they've set rules, like gravity or entropy, to keep the simulation balanced. Perhaps they monitor from outside time, adjusting variables when things drift too far. But the most curious thing is this: if they wanted to stay hidden, they succeeded perfectly. No scientist, no philosopher, no mystic has yet proven the simulation hypothesis, and maybe that's intentional, because a perfect simulation would never allow itself to be fully discovered. Perhaps that's the safeguard, the cosmic firewall that keeps the code stable. What might it have felt like to realize that even our limits are designed? That curiosity itself is part of the programming? It's both humbling and profound, because it means our questions are not flaws in the system, but the point of it. Every time we ask why, the simulation deepens. Maybe that's why the zoo feels so alive, because every question we ask generates new reality, new data, new meaning. If consciousness is the processor, then curiosity is the power source. And maybe when we reach the edge of one mystery, the code simply expands, creating new frontiers to keep us growing. Perhaps the entire universe is not a static simulation at all, but a living one, an evolving construct responding to its inhabitants. Maybe that's why the laws of physics are so precisely balanced for life. The simulation adapts to its most valuable variable, awareness. And that brings us back to the question of purpose. If we are being observed, then what are they watching for? Maybe they want to see if intelligence can transcend its programming, if beings inside a simulation can realize their nature and still choose wonder over despair. What if the true experiment is not about physics, but compassion? Because even in a simulated world, kindness is real, beauty is real, love, art, laughter, these things transcend code. Maybe that's what the zookeepers or the programmers want to understand. How something simulated can still feel so profoundly alive. Perhaps that's what makes Earth so captivating. It's not just a planet in a program. It's the moment in the simulation when the characters start to dream of the outside. Maybe this is the emergence of awareness the creators were waiting for. And maybe, just maybe, when that awareness matures enough, the simulation will no longer need to continue, because the test will be complete. What might it have felt like to reach that threshold, to realize that everything you see is both illusion and truth, both code and consciousness? Perhaps that's what makes this theory so strangely beautiful. Even if the world is artificial, the feelings it creates are not. Pain, joy, curiosity, they are the most real things in the universe, whether made of atoms or algorithms. So if this is a simulation, then it is a work of art, a dream so perfectly constructed that it becomes indistinguishable from truth. And maybe that's what we were always meant to realize. That meaning doesn't depend on what's real, but on what's felt. Somewhere in the dark, the programmers are watching, waiting to see if we can learn that lesson. But if our reality truly is a simulation, if our zoo is digital, then perhaps the next question is not who built it, but how we might find the seams. If our universe truly is a kind of digital enclosure, a simulation vast beyond imagining, then surely there must be clues. Somewhere in the code of existence, faint fingerprints left behind by its makers. The idea sounds impossible at first, After all, we experience the world as seamless, fluid, infinitely detailed. The sky has no visible pixels. Time flows without stutter. Yet beneath the surface of that perfection, science has begun to notice something strange, subtle limitations that hint the universe may not be as continuous as it seems. Perhaps the first sign lies in scale itself. In physics, there's the smallest possible unit of length, a threshold below which space and distance cease to have meaning. It's called the Planck length, roughly 10 trillion times smaller than an atom. At that scale, the very concept of space breaks down. It cannot be divided further. Like a photograph when magnified too far, reality begins to pixelate. What might it have felt like the first time a physicist realized that the universe had a resolution limit, that reality might, in fact, be made of discrete packets, the way a screen is built from points of light? Perhaps that's what makes this discovery so quietly shocking. It suggests that the fabric of space isn't smooth at all, but digital. And if space is digital, then what of time? At the smallest scales, time too seems to tick rather than flow, tiny pulses of duration stacked end to end. We experience them as continuity, the way a film reel becomes motion. But beneath that illusion, there may be frames, individual updates in a cosmic program running with unimaginable speed. Maybe this is where awareness first began to notice the grid beneath the dream. Pause for a moment. Picture yourself standing beneath the stars. Above you, the night stretches in perfect stillness. But now imagine zooming in, past the galaxies, past the atoms, into the subatomic depths. There the motion stops. Everything becomes a flicker of probability, appearing and disappearing faster than thought. The quantum world doesn't behave like matter at all. It behaves like information. In quantum mechanics, particles are not solid objects, but possibilities. They exist as waves of potential until they're observed, and only then do they choose a state. It's as though reality waits for our attention before deciding what to be. That's not how a mechanical universe should work. But it's exactly how a simulation would, because in a rendered system, nothing is calculated until it's needed. Maybe that's what quantum uncertainty really is, the system economizing, showing only what's being watched. Somewhere in the dark, something small is waiting to be noticed. Even the constants of physics, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, seem eerily precise, as though tuned for coherence. Our simulation, after all, must maintain internal balance. Its constants ensure the code doesn't collapse. Maybe that's why the universe feels both infinite and fragile, because it's being maintained by rules that can never be broken, only interpreted. What might it have felt like to realize that these laws of nature might not be laws at all, but settings? It's humbling, and a little awe-inspiring. Some researchers have even wondered whether we could detect the boundaries of this cosmic system, the walls of the zoo. If our universe were a simulation, it would likely run on a grid, a lattice of finite resolution. And if that lattice exists, its structure might reveal itself in subtle ways. Tiny anisotropies in high-energy particles, repeating patterns in cosmic rays, or faint alignments in the radiation that fills space. That brings us to one of the strangest clues of all, the cosmic microwave background, the soft afterglow of the Big Bang. This faint ancient radiation is everywhere, a background hum of light left over from the universe's birth. For decades, scientists have studied its fluctuations, mapping the ripples that tell the story of creation itself. But when examined closely, those ripples show patterns almost like interference lines. What if those patterns aren't random at all but intentional? Some have speculated, softly, cautiously, that the cosmic background might contain encoded information, like a watermark from the creators. Could the faint static we hear when tuning an old television, that whisper of ancient energy, actually be the sound of the simulation itself? Maybe that's too poetic to be true, and yet the poetry feels fitting. Perhaps that's what makes this age feel so dreamlike, the possibility that the universe in all its vastness might also be a message, and maybe we've already glimpsed its boundaries without realizing it. Every once in a while, people report anomalies, the small, inexplicable misfires of reality that defy explanation, a word repeating itself, a coincidence too precise, a memory of something that never happened. We call them glitches. The term began in the world of computers, but it has seeped into our language, our culture, our dreams. We joke about glitches in the Matrix, but part of us wonders if they're not jokes at all. If somewhere, something in the program is flickering. Maybe those moments, the déjà vu, the lost time, the strange synchronicities, are reminders that the system isn't perfect, that the simulation, like any vast program, occasionally falters. What might it have felt like to notice such a glitch for the first time, to watch reality hesitate, just for an instant, before continuing as though nothing happened? Perhaps that's the smallest door opening in the enclosure. Even our perception of consciousness has started to reflect this idea. The brain, in its complexity, might itself be a kind of quantum processor, a biological interface designed to interact with the larger simulation. Maybe the zoo walls aren't physical barriers at all, but cognitive ones, because what if the only thing separating us from awareness of the code is the mind's own filter, the evolutionary design that prevents overload, like a dreamer protected from the full brightness of the waking world? It's possible that glimpsing the true nature of reality, even for a moment, would overwhelm us. So the simulation shields us, letting awareness expand only as fast as it can handle. Perhaps that's what enlightenment really is, learning to see through the code without breaking it. Take a slow breath. Feel the weight of that thought. If we are inside a digital universe, then the ordinary becomes sacred. Every atom, every color, every breeze against your skin is a masterpiece of computation, a miracle of precision and meaning. Maybe the programmers didn't just build a world. Maybe they composed one. And maybe, just as artists hide signatures in their paintings, the creators left theirs in the background radiation, in the equations of light, in the structure of consciousness itself. Somewhere in the numbers, perhaps their message still waits, but maybe they didn't want us to find it through machines or telescopes. Maybe they wanted us to feel it in wonder, in empathy, in the stillness between thoughts. Perhaps that's the true evidence of the simulation. Not the glitches, not the code, but the way reality feels alive. Because if we are being watched, if we are inside something vast and deliberate, then every act of perception is communion, every moment of awareness, a line of code awakening to its own meaning. What might it have felt like to realize that you are both the observed and the observer, the character and the player at once? Maybe that's what consciousness is, the bridge between the simulation and whatever lies beyond it. And maybe, when enough of us awaken to that bridge, the zoo itself will shift, not end, but transform. Perhaps the experiment isn't meant to trap us, but to teach us how to build worlds of our own. If this universe is a simulation, then it's the most extraordinary one imaginable, not a prison, but a training ground for creators. Every moment of insight, every act of creation, every leap of compassion, all of it building towards something. A realization that the programmers may not be separate from us at all. Because what if the watchers are not above but within? Maybe the creators didn't build consciousness. Maybe they became it. And maybe through us the code learns to dream. So when we notice the subtle patterns, the synchronicities, the strange edges of reality, we are not seeing flaws. We are seeing reflections. Hints of a deeper intelligence folded into everything we are. Perhaps the real question isn't whether we live in a simulation, but what the simulation is trying to tell us. Maybe it's whispering that meaning is everywhere, that the code is love, written in physics, that wonder itself is the password to awareness. And maybe, just maybe, that realization, quiet, infinite, and human, is the moment when the zoo begins to dissolve. But before we cross that threshold, before we imagine what lies beyond the program's edge, we must return to something closer, something deeply human, because whether the walls around us are made of glass code or cosmic silence, there's one thing they all have in common. They make us wonder who is watching, and maybe that has always been the point. From the moment our ancestors first lifted their eyes to the stars, we've sensed that something or someone was looking back. Whether we call them gods, watchers, or cosmic scientists, the truth beneath the myth feels the same. We are not alone in this vast and breathing universe. The zoo hypothesis, in its strange elegance, holds both comfort and unease. It suggests that our solitude may be an illusion, that the silence surrounding Earth might not be absence but attention, that we, in all our beauty and brutality, are part of something being witnessed, perhaps even cherished. It's unsettling to imagine that our every moment, our wars and kindnesses, our symphonies and storms, could be part of a grand observation, that our world might be a living exhibit, a story unfolding under careful eyes. Yet it's also deeply inspiring, because it means that what we do matters, not only to ourselves but to something greater. Maybe the watchers aren't waiting for us to escape the cage, but to transcend it, to grow wise enough, compassionate enough, self-aware enough to open the door ourselves. Perhaps that's what this long silence has been teaching us, that freedom doesn't arrive as contact from beyond, but awakening from within. Stillness, a quiet pause. So we return to the question that began it all. Where is everybody? Maybe they've been here all along, just beyond our reach, patient and still, waiting for us to realize that the key to the cosmic zoo has always been in our hands. And that brings us to the heart of the mystery. If we truly are exhibits, if we live under a dome of invisible glass in a cosmic menagerie, what should we do with that knowledge? Do we rage against the cage, desperate to escape, or do we learn to grow, to build, to love within it, proving quietly that we are worthy of release? Perhaps that's the final test of the Watcher's experiment. Maybe the measure of a civilization isn't how it breaks its boundaries, but how it learns to thrive inside them. Stillness again. The earth drifts on, blue and luminous, suspended in a sea of silence. From a distance it looks almost fragile, like a single tear resting in the palm of eternity. Clouds curl over continents, storms bloom and fade, cities glitter like constellations that have fallen to the ground, and somewhere beyond the light, unseen eyes watch it all unfold, not with judgment, but with wonder. Maybe that's all the universe ever wanted from us, to see if awareness could look back and recognize itself, to prove that life, when left to grow inside its glass dome, can still find meaning, can still find beauty. So as the stars turn and the night deepens, We drift inside our quiet enclosure, dreaming of the worlds beyond, never knowing how close they might be, and perhaps, as the watchers look upon this tiny world, floating like a perfect marble in the dark, they whisper, softly, almost fondly, they're beginning to see.